Secretary of Defense ignored a helpless old woman until a female soldier stopped him cold. It began on a rain-soaked square, where hundreds hurried by without looking, where indifference felt safer than compassion. In the middle of it all, an elderly woman stood alone, clutching a worn handbag and whispering for help. She wasn't invisible. Everyone saw her. They just chose not to. Even when the most powerful man in the nation's defense establishment, Secretary Richard Halston, passed by with his entourage, he didn't slow his stride. Cameras caught his confident gestures, the umbrella shielding him from the storm. But they also caught the woman he ignored. What no one expected was that a single soldier would break the script. Captain Elena Brooks saw what others pretended not to. She stepped out from the shadows of protocol into the rain and bent on one knee to meet the old woman's eyes. That decision, quiet, human, almost ordinary, ignited a firestorm. Phones rose. Reporters turned. A choice that should have cost her career began to cost the secretary something far greater: his reputation. This story is about power and conscience, about a widow carrying memory, a soldier carrying duty, and a leader who tried to carry nothing at all. Stay with us, because what unfolded in that square would change everything. If you believe stories like this must be told, subscribe now, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. The rain arrived like a curtain, turning the city square into a blur of umbrellas and hurried steps. People moved as if time itself were slipping, eyes fixed on screens or puddles, unwilling to look up. Near the statue of forgotten heroes, an old woman stood alone, her coat too thin for the weather, her fingers clasped around a trembling handbag. She turned right, then left, searching for a face that might meet hers. The crowd slid past her like a river around a stone. No one meant harm. They simply didn't want to see. Indifference is warm and fast. Compassion is cold and slow. She whispered, "Excuse me," but the rain carried the words away. Across the square, sirens did not wail, but engines purred in practice formation. A convoy eased toward the steps of the defense building, dark glass and steel rising like a cliff. The Secretary of Defense, Richard Halston, emerged beneath a black umbrella handled by a staffer who never made eye contact. His steps were measured, cut from protocol. The camera phones tilted his way, framing a man who mistook attention for respect. Halston scanned the path, clocked the route, weighed the optics, and then, for the briefest moment, his gaze skimmed the old woman. His eyes moved on as if she were a raindrop. The umbrella never slowed. Captain Elena Brooks stood just inside the lobby, helmet in hand, uniform damp at the shoulders. She didn't belong to the photo op. She'd been filing readiness reports that no one would read until something broke. Through the glass, she saw the scene on the steps, the entourage, the orbit of aides, the press angling for a quote. She also saw the old woman's face, that quick flash of disorientation that people hide from because it feels like failure to witness it. Elena tried to swallow the impulse to move. Chain of command is a strong leash. Conscience tugs harder. The old woman turned again, slower now. "I'm trying to find," her sentence frayed, then vanished as a shoulder bumped her. A shopping bag split. Oranges rolled away. Bright coins on wet stone. No one bent down. The crowd compressed, then loosened, a living thing protecting its momentum. She crouched to catch an orange and gasped at the pinch in her hip. A man muttered an apology he didn't mean and kept going. The rain thickened. Somewhere, a child laughed at a distant joke. The city kept its promise to be busy. Halston's aide murmured the talking points: readiness, modernization, community partnership. He nodded at the rhythm, not the meaning. When the aide gestured toward the press line, Halston lifted his chin, performing the subtle geometry of power. He didn't have time to notice small human emergencies. That's the benefit and the cost of altitude. He stepped forward, voice warming from microphones. "We appreciate the steadfast." The sentence never finished in Elena's head. Her view had shifted back to the old woman gripping a bench, breathing shallow, refusing to sit, because sitting sometimes means surrender. Elena exhaled. The kind you give up only once choices happen inside you. She pushed through the revolving door and into the rain. Without her cap, boots darkening with each step, An MP at the entrance started to say something about protocol and optics, then read the stubborn angle of her shoulders and said nothing. The square smelled like wet concrete and hot engines. She crossed the path of the convoy. A driver braked, honked, then recognized a uniform and stilled. The small silence after a horn matters. People looked up. Attention is contagious. "Ma'am," Elena said, crouching beside the old woman, voice low so dignity could breathe. "May I help you?" The old woman blinked at the insignia, not the rank. "I'm trying to find the place with the wall and the names," she said, palm trembling like paper in wind. "My husband's name is there, or should be." Her voice cracked on should. Elena felt the square till the degree. In the shadow of a building dedicated to defense, a memory was under attack by weather and hurry. She reached for the oranges, returned them to the bag one by one, a small liturgy against neglect. Phones angled again, some toward Halston, some toward the soldier kneeling in rain. A reporter glanced from one lens to the other, calculating which story might bloom faster. Halston continued past the steps, letting the prepared statement carry on rails. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. "There's a memorial 2 blocks east," Elena said, standing slowly so the old woman could use her arm like a railing. "Margaret." The woman offered, as if names were passports. "Margaret Collins." Elena's hand steadied. "Collins." The name chimed somewhere she couldn't place, like a song you realize you know after the chorus. "Captain, we need you inside." The MP called, not unkindly, already nervous about being noticed. Elena's jaw worked, not in defiance, but in arithmetic. Duty against duty, visible against invisible orders. She looked at Halston's back, receding beneath the umbrella, a dark punctuation mark moving toward speeches about service. Margaret's fingers tightened around Elena's sleeve. "If I sit, I might not get up," she said, an apology for being human. Elena smiled without showing teeth. "Then we won't sit." It wasn't eloquent, but it was a bridge. The MP shook his head once and turned away, choosing a smaller sin. They began to walk, the pace of careful pain. Elena matched it, ignoring the drip that found the back of her collar. 2 blocks, she said, scanning for slick spots. "Your husband's unit?" Margaret exhaled like a door opening. "He served under a colonel then. Later became someone important." The words carried a weight that didn't fit their volume. Elena felt that shallow click again, the almost memory. She pictured an old briefing, a citation in a dusty binder, a surname that traveled well in certain rooms. "We'll find his name," Elena said, and hoped the certainty sounded bigger than the weather. Behind them, a staffer reached Halston with an urgent whisper. "Sir, a soldier is assisting someone in view of the press." It wasn't a complaint about kindness. It was fear of narrative collision. Halston didn't slow. "Then let them film the uniform," he said, tone flat with confidence. "Service looks good on camera." He didn't ask who the someone was. He didn't ask if the soldier had a name. He gave the press line his practiced half-smile, the kind that never touches the eyes. In the square, Elena and Margaret turned east, and the crowd at last began to part. Elena adjusted the old woman's bag on her forearm and glanced down. The handbag's flap had curled back just enough to reveal a small metal disc on a chain, etched with worn symbols. Not jewelry. Something else. Something earned. Margaret noticed Elena's glance and covered it with her palm, as if protecting a flame from rain. "It was his," she said. "He told me it mattered more than a ceremony." Elena looked toward the memorial, where names become anchors. She didn't know yet why her chest had tightened. Only that sometimes the path to truth is 2 blocks long and soaked. Elena steadied Margaret at the edge of the square, rain dripping from her jawline, boots sinking slightly in the slick pavement. The convoy engines hummed behind them, impatient like caged predators. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes shifting toward her, some out of curiosity, some out of judgment. Kneeling in uniform wasn't regulation in such a moment, but her instinct overrode the book of rules stamped in her memory. She lowered herself, one knee hitting wet stone, to look Margaret in the eye. The act was so simple, but it cut against a grain of power in the square. The old woman's lips trembled, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, as if she couldn't fathom why anyone would stop. Phones rose higher, recording the posture that redefined the scene. Margaret whispered, "Everyone walked past me, dear. Why didn't you?" Elena hesitated, not because she lacked an answer, but because the truth was too plain. She couldn't bear the indifference any longer. "Because you matter," she said softly. It was a phrase that could be dismissed as sentimental, but in that moment it detonated like a charge. The nearest reporter caught it, his microphone lowered but his memory sharp, already composing the lead line. Behind Elena, Halston turned his head fractionally, irritation flickering across his eyes. This wasn't in the script. His voice had been prepared to command the room, but the room's gaze had shifted without permission. Halston leaned toward an aide, muttering, "Control this. Move her aside." But the aide faltered, seeing the forming circle of civilians who now focused not on the secretary's umbrella, but on the soldier in the rain. Elena pulled an orange in the torn bag and handed it to Margaret, her gloved fingers steady despite the chill. It was not ceremony. It was nourishment, and that distinction bit into Halston's carefully crafted image. "Let's get you somewhere dry," Elena said, her tone carrying the quiet strength of someone who knew that obedience sometimes meant betrayal of conscience. Margaret nodded weakly, tears mixing with raindrops. Elena shifted her body to shield her, an instinct older than training. A teenage boy in the crowd called out, "She's helping her," when no one else did. The words broke through the silence like a stone through glass. Cameras swung, capturing not the rehearsed press statement, but the unscripted morality play unfolding on the wet stones. Elena heard the words and felt her chest tighten, not in fear but in awareness. This was no longer a private act of conscience. It was spectacle, and spectacle had consequences. She glanced at Halston, who stiffened, his umbrella tilted, rain finally touching his hair, the first crack in his impervious shell. A photographer zoomed in, capturing the moment that arrogance met vulnerability. Margaret clutched Elena's arm with a strength that surprised both of them. "You remind me of him," she whispered, her voice carrying a ghost. "My husband," always the one who stopped. Elena froze for a heartbeat. The surname Collins echoed again, sharper now. What was his rank? Elena asked, voice barely audible. Margaret's lips formed the word colonel. The crowd didn't hear it, but Elena did, and it threaded itself into her mind like a puzzle piece snapping. Colonel Collins, a name in a briefing she had skimmed, attached to a file that once crossed Halston's desk. Her stomach tightened with a sense that she had stepped into more than compassion. She had stepped into history's unbared secret. Halston's aide moved again, trying to pull Elena back with a hand on her shoulder, but the gesture was too weak against the gravity of the scene. "Captain, this isn't appropriate," he hissed. Elena met his eyes, unflinching. "Then maybe appropriate is enough." Her words, low but sharp, carried farther than she intended, picked up by the microphones. A ripple ran through the crowd. Gasps, murmurs, the sudden energy of people recognizing a fracture in the script. Margaret leaned closer, her frail body trembling, but her voice now steadier. "Don't let them forget us." Elena squeezed her hand. "Not today." The phrase lodged itself in the audience's memory, a seed for headlines. The square shifted from indifference to witness. Pedestrians who had ignored Margaret now stopped entirely, drawn by the weight of contrast. Power in suits ignoring, a soldier in uniform kneeling. Elena rose slowly, supporting Margaret with one arm, facing the secretary directly for the first time. Their eyes locked across the wet space, a silent clash of two worlds. Halston's jaw clenched, his calculated authority colliding with her uncalculated defiance. Cameras caught the standoff, flashbulbs crackling like lightning. For the first time in his career, Halston realized he did not control the narrative. The narrative was kneeling in front of him, drenched but unbroken. "Move them now," Halston barked, louder, trying to seize momentum. But no one moved. Not the aides, not the guards, not even the press that usually obeyed invisible signals of hierarchy. Elena's choice had shifted the gravity of the moment. Margaret's presence had sanctified it. The boy's shout had magnified it, and Halston's hesitation had cemented it. Elena turned slightly, raising her hand to hail a passing medic van. signaling aid without asking permission. The small wave felt like a command, and people responded as if it were. Halston's voice thundered again, but the sound was drowned by the applause starting at the square's edge. What began as a ripple became a wave. Elena guided Margaret beneath the thin awning of a kiosk, where the rain softened to a mist and the noise of the square felt a fraction farther away. "Breathe with me," she said, matching the old woman's rhythm until the tremor in her hands eased. Margaret nodded, then loosened her grip on the handbag. The flap fell open, revealing that small metal disc Elena had glimpsed, scuffed edges, a hairline crack, an emblem that drew the eye, an eagle clutching lightning, a wreath encircling a motto almost erased by years of touch. It wasn't a trinket. It was a challenge coin, heavy with the kind of history that doesn't die when ceremonies end. Cameras leaned in, rain popping on their plastic shrouds like static. Elena lifted the coin with both palms, as if handling a wafer at communion. "May I?" she asked. Margaret answered by placing her hand over Elena's and pressing gently. "He kept it with him even when the house was empty of everything else," she said. Said it was the only proof that men remembered what they asked of him. Elena turned the coin under the gray light. The inscription bled through 3rd Sustainment Brigade, Operation Night Ember. The words detonated in her memory. Night Ember. A logistics miracle on paper, a meat grinder in the after-action report she'd read as a junior officer. Her throat tightened. She could hear the echo of a line from those pages. Request for honors, unresolved. A reporter edged closer. "Captain, what are we looking at?" Elena didn't look up. "A promise," she said. One that wasn't kept. Halston's attention, at the top of the steps, finally snapped fully toward the kiosk. He knew the name Night Ember. It was one of the stars embroidered into the inside of his speeches. Proof of difficult choices made with steady hands. He signaled his aide to fetch the talking points binder, a legalistic shield. Elena rubbed the coin with her thumb, revealing a second line. C-O-L-A, Collins. The surname landed with the precision of a hammer strike. Margaret's eyes brightened through rain. "They told him the paper would come later," she whispered. "He waited years. It never did." A security officer moved to block the cameras, but a woman from the press pool spoke up, sharp as a whistle. "Public space, public interest." The barrier hesitated and then dissolved. Elena straightened, the coin in one hand, Margaret's elbow in the other. "He served under a colonel who later rose," Margaret said, voice careful, like stepping between stones in a fast river. "My husband carried men on his back when the trucks failed. He carried their names when the letters failed." The teen from earlier edged into frame, phone aimed, narrating to the internet. "They're talking about a mission the secretary bragged about last year." His comment skittered across the moment like a spark seeking fuel. Elena looked from the coin to Halston, a line connecting past and present like wire. "Sir," she called, not loudly, but with a clarity that cut through the rain. Heads turned. Halston paused halfway down the steps, umbrella black crown, jaw hard. "Do you recognize this?" She raised the coin without flourish, letting its weight speak. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of counting. People tallying rumors, after images, old headlines. Halston descended 2 more steps, then stopped, calculating angles. "We honor all who served," he said finally, projecting concord where there was only evasion. It wasn't an answer. It was a fog. Margaret's spine straightened a fraction, dignity threading itself through her pain. "He didn't want speeches," she said to Elena, not to Halston. "He wanted truth. He wanted to know that when he was gone, someone would call his name where others could hear it." Elena's stare didn't leave Halston. "Sir, Operation Night Ember had a pending honors package for Colonel Collins and his men. It was delayed, then displaced." The word she chose was surgical. The crowd leaned as one body. Halston swallowed, eyes cooling, the calculus shifting toward denial. "Operational matters are classified," he said. A low murmur rolled. People recognized the sound of a door being closed on them. Elena stepped half a pace forward, enough to make the guards tense but not move. "Classification protects lives," she said, steady, not reputations. She turned the coin again, a faint date surfaced, etched, then scratched, then almost gone. It matched the week of Night Ember's worst losses, the week those reports said fuel vanished, evac windows shrank, and a colonel filed a request that never found signature. The rain softened further, as if the sky itself were leaning closer. Margaret's fingers tightened on Elena's sleeve. "If you read it," she whispered, not pleading, remembering. Elena answered without turning. "I did." Halston took the final steps, arriving on the square that no longer belonged to him. He stopped less than 5 paces from Elena and Margaret. Up close, the coin was unmistakable. Up close, so was the question. Elena lifted her chin, a soldier speaking to a civilian who commanded soldiers. "We can walk her to Memorial now," she said, voice gentle for Margaret and edge for him. "And when we get there, sir, we'll see if the name that should be carved in stone is still waiting on someone's pen." The sentence landed like a gauntlet placed, not thrown. A chorus of camera shutters answered. Halston's mouth opened, then closed. Elena slipped the coin back into Margaret's hand and covered it with both of hers. "We'll carry it together," she said. The phrase wasn't rhetorical. It was logistics of the heart. She turned, guiding Margaret toward the street that would lead to the wall. The crowd parted again, not like fleeing water this time, but like an honor guard forming itself without orders. At the curb, a police cruiser paused. The officer inside lifted 2 fingers in a small, old salute. Elena returned it with a nod. The moment crystallized. No decree, no ceremony, just a quiet transfer of weight from one generation to another. Behind them, Halston stood in rain. He could no longer keep off. The walk toward the memorial began slowly, every step accompanied by the sound of shutters and a flicker of lights bouncing off rain-soaked glass. Elena kept her arm steady under Margaret's, each pace deliberate, her free hand curling around the coin inside the old woman's palm. Reporters trailed behind, their voices a low hum, until one broke through. "Secretary Halston, did you ignore her because you knew who she was?" The words carried like a flare in the storm. Halston's jaw tightened, his umbrella tilting slightly as though to shield him from more than rain. The question, once asked, could not be unasked. Phones caught his silence. The silence became its own answer. Margaret's voice, fragile but audible, wove into the tension. "He said they would honor my husband. I believed him." She did not look at Halston, but her words landed squarely on his shoulders. Elena glanced sideways. The crowd's energy had shifted from curiosity to indictment. People who had arrived as bystanders were now participants, murmuring agreement, shaking heads, recording every second. Elena felt the crowd turning into a jury. The boy from earlier streamed live, whispering commentary to thousands online. She's saying the secretary lied. What began as rain-dampened sympathy was becoming a blaze of anger. Halston quickened his pace, aides close at his heels. But for every step he gained, Elena's presence pulled the attention back. Cameras zoomed on her. Kneeling soldier turned reluctant spokesperson, guiding an elderly widow across stone meant to honor sacrifice. "Captain Brooks," a reporter shouted, "do you believe the secretary buried this request?" Elena inhaled sharply, every instinct screaming to remain within the bounds of duty. She looked at Margaret's trembling hand and chose conscience instead. "I believe paperwork is powerful," she said, steady but unsparing, and silence even more so. Gasps rippled. It wasn't a direct accusation, but it might as well have been. Halston snapped. "That's enough." His voice was sharp, intended to cut, but the square had changed. Authority once unquestioned now sounded brittle. The microphones did not lower. Instead, they pivoted fully toward Elena. Halston had spoken thousands of times in polished halls. Never had his words felt so disposable. Elena's heart pounded, not from fear of him, but from the awareness that her life had just changed in a single sentence. The military valued obedience. Disobedience was a risk she could not calculate yet. And still, she didn't regret it. The press smelled blood in the water. Margaret halted, placing both hands on the coin. Her voice rose higher than before, cracking yet defiant. "My husband's name is not on that wall, because he trusted a man who walks with umbrellas and empty words. The line cut to the storm like thunder. The crowd roared, not applause this time, but outrage, pure and unfiltered. Elena braced Margaret as the old woman's strength waned. A medic arrived, crouching low, but Margaret waved him off with surprising steel. "I will reach that wall," she said. Elena steadied her again. The conviction in those words was another hammer blow against Halston's shield. A camera caught Halston's grimace, the kind of micro-expression analysts freeze-frame to dissect. His aide whispered frantically, "Sir, we should retreat inside." But retreat was no longer possible. Every lens, every phone, every live feed would turn that retreat into a confession. Halston squared his shoulders, forcing composure, but the crowd had already written the headline. Secretary runs from widow's truth. Elena's gaze locked on his, not triumphant, but resolute. She didn't need victory. She needed Margaret to be heard. That clarity burned stronger than fear of rank or consequence. The reporters pressed closer. "Captain Brooks, will you testify about Operation Night Ember?" The question was a blade hidden in silk, and Elena knew the weight of answering it. Her throat dried. Margaret clutched her sleeve, whispering, "Don't let him erase us." Elena lifted her eyes to the cameras. "I'll speak when it matters most," she said. It was not a yes, not a no, but it was enough to ignite speculation. Twitter feeds lit up instantly, headlines drafting themselves mid-broadcast. Halston's lips tightened further. Every path he took narrowed toward collapse. The memorial loomed just ahead, names etched into granite darkened by the rain. Margaret's step slowed, her breath heavy, but her resolve brighter than before. Elena adjusted her pace, half carrying her forward. The cameras followed, unwilling to miss the convergence. A widow, a soldier, a secretary. One represented memory, one conscience, one arrogance. The coin glinted between Margaret's hands like a shard of lightning caught on earth. As they reached the first line of names, Elena felt the shift. The moment was no longer about her, or even Margaret. It was about everyone who had been silenced by paper and power. The question now was whether Halston would stand in that silence, or break under it. The granite wall loomed larger with every step, rows of names glistening as though the rain itself had polished them for this moment. Margaret's breath grew shallow, but her eyes locked on the memorial with unbreakable resolve. Elena steadied her, sensing that something awaited here that would pierce through more than just memory. The cameras closed in, their reflections dancing on the wet stone. "Do you see it?" Elena asked softly. Margaret's hand trembled across the etched names. "I see the men he saved," she whispered, fingertips brushing letters like they were faces. The crowd hushed, drawn into the gravity of her search. A few steps back, Halston shifted uneasily, knowing every second extended the trial he hadn't prepared for. Margaret stopped midway down the wall. Her fingers stilled on a blank stretch between carved lines. She turned, her frail body shaking, but her voice steady as iron. "His name should be here," she said, pointing to the void. Gasps rolled through the onlookers. Elena's stomach clenched. The absence screamed louder than any word. The reporters surged forward, microphones thrust like daggers. "Secretary Halston, can you explain why Colonel Collins isn't honored?" Halston's lips parted, searching for the safety of jargon, but the weight of silence pressed down harder. "Records must be incomplete," he stammered. The excuse landed like shattered glass, brittle and cutting. The crowd erupted in outrage, their voices carrying over the rain like thunder. Margaret straightened, her hand clutching the coin as if drawing strength from the metal. "Incomplete?" she spat, her fragile voice rising to a roar. He carried men dying on his back. He carried this nation's orders even when they broke him. And you call his sacrifice incomplete? Her words split the air, each syllable striking Halston like a blow. Elena's chest swelled with both pride and sorrow. Margaret had transformed from a trembling widow into a warrior of memory. The press circled closer, broadcasting every raw second. The boy with the live stream exclaimed, "She's exposing him. This is history." Thousands tuned in, the narrative escaping the square and flooding into homes, offices, and phones across the country. Elena bent slightly, her voice steady as she addressed Margaret. "Tell them what you know." Margaret's eyes burned with unshed tears. My husband wrote reports, detailed the shortages, the orders left unsigned. He said a man higher up blocked recognition to protect his own ascent. She turned her gaze to Halston, unflinching. That man was you. The accusation detonated. The crowd surged, a collective gasp followed by angry shouts. Elena felt her pulse race, not from surprise she had suspected, but from the audacity of truth spoken aloud. Halston froze, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second, revealing panic. Cameras zoomed. His fear was no longer invisible. Halston's aide leapt forward, barking, "This is slander!" But the crowd drowned him out, their voices overlapping in defiance. Margaret raised a coin high above her head, rain dripping from her arm, the symbol gleaming under floodlights. "This was proof he belonged among heroes," she cried, her voice carrying across the memorial. "And proof that you buried him with your silence." Elena's throat tightened. She recognized a moment for what it was. The final blow to Halston's facade. The coin was not just metal, it was testimony. The press snapped photos, the image already destined for tomorrow's front pages. A widow accusing, a soldier supporting, a secretary cornered. Halston tried to step forward, attempting to seize back authority. "I acted in the nation's interest," he said, voice trembling on the edges of control. But the words fell flat. The crowd jeered. A man shouted, "Whose interest? Yours." The echo caught fire, repeated until it became a chant. Elena stood straighter, her hand still gripping Margaret's shoulder, anchoring her. The soldier's silence became the sharpest blade. She didn't need to speak because Margaret had spoken for generations. Halston's authority eroded not by force, but by exposure. The cameras captured every falter in his expression, each second another nail hammered into his career's coffin. Margaret turned to Elena, her face pale, but her spirit blazing. "You stopped for me," she whispered. "But you also stopped for him, for all of them." Elena swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "No one deserves to be erased," she replied. The old woman's hand slipped into hers, the coin pressed between their palms. The gesture sealed something unspoken, a vow passed from widow to soldier. Behind them, the chant grew louder, the crowd's outrage merging into a force that no press secretary or aide could contain. Halston looked smaller now, diminished under the shadow of names he had failed to honor. As lightning flashed above the memorial, Elena felt the weight of history tilt. Margaret had delivered the revelation, a truth too heavy to be hidden anymore. The soldier had carried her to the wall, but the widow had carried the nation's conscience to its breaking point. The cliffhanger hung sharp in the air. What consequence would follow for Halston? The story had reached its turning point, and the conclusion was inevitable. The only question left was whether he would bow to memory or be broken by it. The storm's fury eased into a steady drizzle, but the storm inside the square only grew. The crowd pressed closer, chants pounding against the granite wall like waves against rock. Halston stood rigid, his umbrella abandoned, hair plastered against his forehead. Cameras captured him cornered between power and truth. Margaret's hand, small but resolute, gripped Elena's as if to anchor herself against collapse. Elena felt the weight of generations pressing into her shoulders. She had chosen conscience over obedience, and now the entire nation bore witness. The silence from Halston stretched too long. In politics, silence is louder than confession. Every second cost him ground he would never regain. Finally, Halston lowered his head, shoulders stiff, voice low but audible. "For all who have forgotten, I bow." It was a sentence meant to regain control, but the act that followed was stripped of calculation. Before the granite wall, under the eyes of history, the Secretary of Defense bent forward, not in military salute but in something rawer. The cameras flashed furiously, capturing the image of man forced to bend not by command, but by shame. The crowd gasped, the sound swelling into applause. It wasn't approval, it was vindication. Elena's breath caught, realizing she had just witnessed the undoing of arrogance by the gentlest rebellion imaginable. Margaret's lips trembled. "He should have bowed years ago," she said softly, but there was no bitterness, only release. Elena guided her closer to names, helping her place the coin against the blank space where Colonel Collins's name should have been. The metal clicked against stone, a sound that rang louder than any speech. "You're home," Margaret whispered, tears mingling with rain. The crowd fell silent, reverent, as though watching a burial in reverse, an erasure being undone, dignity resurrected. Elena tightened her grip on Margaret's shoulder, steadying her through the trembling. It was not victory in the military sense. It was justice stripped bare. Halston remained bowed longer than anyone expected. When he straightened, his eyes met Elena's across the space. No words passed, but the message was clear. He had lost, and she had rewritten the story. His aides hovered, frantic, but powerless to salvage what had been shattered. Elena didn't gloat. She held Margaret's hand, focusing only on the fragile life beside her. Yet inside, she felt the tremor of consequence. Disobedience had saved a widow, exposed a lie, and shifted public conscience. But what price would come after? For now, she allowed herself the grace of silence, choosing not to spoil the sacred moment with fear of tomorrow. Reporters broke the quiet. "Captain Brooks, what will happen now?" Elena turned, rain streaking her face, uniform soaked and heavy, yet her posture unwavering. "What happens now is not about me," she said. "It's about remembering the ones who carried us, even when we forgot to carry them." The words echoed across microphones, transmitted instantly to a nation starved for truth. The crowd erupted again, not with anger this time, but with applause that rolled like thunder. Margaret leaned into Elena's arm, whispering, "You gave him back to me." Elena blinked hard, hiding her tears. "No, ma'am," she said quietly. "You gave him back to all of us." The memorial stood transformed, no longer a cold monument, but a living stage of reckoning. Strangers reached out to touch Margaret's arm, to thank her, to honor the memories she had carried alone for so long. Elena helped her sit finally, exhaustion overtaking resolve. Cameras lingered, capturing the tableau, a widow resting at the wall, a soldier standing guard, and a secretary diminished in the background. Historians would later freeze-frame this day as the moment compassion toppled arrogance. For now, Elena simply kept her promise. No one would walk past Margaret again. The old woman was no longer invisible. She was the heart of the story. Halston attempted one last line, voice brittle. "Let us move forward together." But the words slipped through the crowd, unwanted. Moving forward was not his to command anymore. Elena ignored him, focusing on Margaret, who reached once more toward the coin. "Keep it," Margaret urged, pressing it into Elena's hand. "Carry him with you." Elena hesitated, then closed her fist around it, feeling the cool weight of legacy. "I will," she vowed. The cameras snapped again, immortalizing the gesture. The crowd cheered, not for Halston, not even for Margaret, but for the truth finally spoken aloud. A story buried in silence had clawed its way into the light. As medics prepared to escort Margaret gently away, Elena lifted her eyes to the sky. The drizzle eased, clouds parting just enough for a shaft of pale sunlight to strike the wall. The name shimmered, and though Collins's was missing, the space where it should have been glowed like a wound that demanded healing. Elena knew battles didn't end in squares or headlines. They ended in paperwork, tribunals, reforms. Yet she also knew this moment had broken the cycle. The chant that had risen earlier now softened into song, voices humming a tune of honor and grief. It wasn't scripted, but it was right. Margaret closed her eyes, smiling faintly, her mission complete. Elena stood watch as Margaret was led away, the coin pressing into her palm like a silent oath. Around her, the crowd began to disperse, carrying with them the story that would outlast speeches and scandals. Halston vanished into the building behind dark glass, but his absence was irrelevant now. What mattered was a widow who refused to be forgotten, the soldier who chose to kneel, and the truth carved not into stone, but into memory. Elena exhaled slowly, realizing she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Yet she felt no regret. For once, obedience had bowed to humanity, and humanity had won. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales where truth confronts arrogance. Like and share to spread Margaret's voice, so no sacrifice is ever forgotten again. And if you believe these stories deserve to keep being told, become a member today. Your support ensures more voices from the shadows find the light. More unforgettable stories are on the way. Don't miss the next revelation that will shake your heart.